right. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the fourth Mobilizing Justice Community Practice webinar of this year. We're very grateful for you all for joining us for this discussion hosted by the Center for Active Transportation, otherwise known as TCAT. My name is Sophie Callahan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a project coordinator here at TCAT. And I'm also joined here by TCAT's director, David Seymour, who uses he, him pronouns in moderating today's session. I know that every time TCAT has hosted one of these workshops, it's been a pleasure to see so many returning and new faces both logging onto the call. And for anyone whose first time it is at a Mobilizing Justice Community of Practice activity, a really warm welcome. These workshops are typically designed as opportunities to share knowledge and explore strategies to reduce transport poverty and increase modal choice across Canada. Maps are powerful tools for identifying and communicating where transportation inequities exist and for whom. So today we're joined by a very special guest presenter, Dr. Jamie Fisher. Jamie uses she, they pronouns and is a provost postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto working with the Mobilizing Justice Partnership. Jamie has expertise in equity in transport, GI science, community-engaged research, and decolonizing and indigenizing practices. As a Michif or Métis person and researcher, Jamie has a strong passion for addressing issues of Indigenous mobility and justice, and their current research program will work to embed Indigenous perspectives and methodologies in transportation planning, policy, data, and measures. So in today's session, Jamie will be introducing us to an exciting free web tool that can serve as an incredible resource for communicating about transportation equity in Canada using maps and data. But before we dive further into the session, we'll just begin with a land acknowledgement. So while we're meeting virtually, TCAT acknowledges that the land on which we operate is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. These sacred lands are covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement forged between the Anishinaabe Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to peaceably share resources. At TCAT, we recognize that many Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to climate change and will be faster and disproportionately impacted by its effects. Through our work, we are committed to disrupting ongoing approaches to governance that reproduce settler colonial relations and systematically exclude Indigenous peoples from policymaking. So as I mentioned, David and I represent the Center for Active Transportation, which is a nonprofit based in Toronto and the organization that hosts these convenings. We're also joined, I'm sure, also by several Mobilizing Justice and partners and researchers in the audience, which is great to see. Just a brief introduction to us and our work. TCAT exists to build safer, healthier, and more equitable places, and we do that specifically by working with and supporting communities in creating safer streets for walking and riding bikes. Just a quick agenda for today so that we know where we're headed. We're going to first begin with a brief introduction to the Mobilizing Justice Project, as well as everyone's favorite quick icebreaker. Our presenter, Jamie, will then be walking us through the Mobilizing Justice Hub and exploring the Transportation Equity Dashboard, which is a free mapping application that helps users identify sustainable transportation inequities in Canadian cities and is a user-friendly tool that's designed for residents, communities, advocates, planners, policymakers, decision-makers, researchers, and many more folks. Jamie will also be sharing case studies of how the hub has been utilized, and there will be an opportunity for participants to explore the hub and share their reflections and questions. And then we'll just take a few moments at the end to wrap up. So first, just to quickly say a few words, though, about what Mobilizing Justice is and what this community of practice is. So we've been convening these webinars as part of the Mobilizing Justice Initiative, which is a 5-year project and intersectoral partnership between 33 academics, 14 government agencies, 7 transportation companies, and 7 nonprofits. And this coalition exists to better understand and recognize transportation inequities in and across Canada. So broken down, the Mobilizing Justice Project is defined by 3 main objectives. So first being to document the causes, effects, and responses to transportation inequities. Then to evaluate equitable standards and practices for practitioners seeking to increase transportation equity, and to evaluate pilot projects and initiatives being implemented across the country, which seek to improve access to transportation for marginalized communities. Before moving into our icebreaker, I wanted to just touch on, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean about transport or mobility equity. We could absolutely dedicate an entire year of sessions to simply define the concept, but we like to use Jay Pitter's definition, who has worked on the Mobilizing Justice Project, as a framework for grounding our conversations. So being mobility equity strives to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, class, or any other social identity, is able to access safety, joy, and prosperity with dignity while journeying. It is not simply about moving people from point A to point B. Mobility equity is freedom. So on that note, as always, we will start with a short poll to get a sense of where you're all coming from and what type of work you do. So there are a few different ways that you can join us to be able to participate in the Menti poll. You can click the link that I think, David, if you haven't done so already, if you could kindly put that in the chat. Or feel free to scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. Or option 3, you can just type in menti.com wherever you want to join from and enter the code that's on my screen, which is 1208. 9878. Again, that code is 1208-9878 at menti.com. When I start the icebreaker, that joining information will also be on my screen. So if you join in and begin providing answers, we can all follow along on this poll together. So I'm just going to take a moment to switch over the screen that I'm sharing so that we can see your great input. There we go. All right, I see that some of you are already joining and sharing which part of the country you're based in, which is great. I'll give you a few more moments to do that. All right, great. I see, West Coast, East Coast, lots of folks in between with us here in Ontario, some of you in Quebec as well. All right, we'll go on to our next question for you, which is, which mode of transportation do you work on? Yeah, so which of these modes are sort of most related to the work that you do? Lots of people in the public transit sphere, that's great. Sustainable mobility more holistically. Others in the active transportation realm with us. Some cycling specific folks, which is great. Other representing different perspectives. Fantastic. Ooh, more in the active transportation field. All good. All right. So our next question would be, what type of built environment do you work in? So whether you work in mainly urban spheres, a combination of urban and other built environments, whether you speak more to peri-urban or suburban areas, rural areas, or you're really holistic, taking a look at all. Yeah, so I see quite a few of you sort of work in multiple built environments. Maybe not surprising, we're talking about sort of connectivity. It's great. At least one person representing rural areas, that's great. All right. So then this is just a sort of open response. We're just curious what type of organization you're representing, whether you are a service provider, whether your organization is really more about advocacy, whether you do programming in the community, maybe you're a Mobilizing Justice partner, maybe not. Great. Okay, so great that we have some folks in transit and transportation agencies and authorities. That's wonderful. Yeah, great. I see sort of different levels of governance in your work. I'm seeing federal levels, municipal level. That's wonderful. Great. Community programming. So yeah, also non-government. That's wonderful. Education. Awesome. I think this is a good topic for you to be joining. Great. Great to see such a spread. All right. So we also are curious whether you have attended a previous Mobilizing Justice Community of Practice session. Okay, so I see a lot of returning folks, some new. That's great. All right, sort of tipping the scales a bit. Oh, it's great to see such a mix of returning and newer folks too. Wonderful. And in case you're just sort of joining us now, just to reiterate, we're participating in some Menti polls right now. You can see the instructions at the top of this screen to join in. So that's going to menti.com using the code 12089878 to be able to join. Great. So next, very important question. Let's fast forward a few hours from now. It's movie night. What genre are you watching? Are you putting on a documentary? You into sci-fi, fantasy, rom-com, period dramas? Are you into more sort of action, like a heist movie? Something artsy or sort of Criterion Collection-esque horror? Because yeah, I mean, this is reflecting clearly my perspective on horror because real life isn't stressful and intense enough. But the camp that I will admit that I fall the most into. Who has the attention span for a full-length feature film in 2024? Maybe you're more of a sort of series person like I am. All right, I see some people in my boat, both in terms of attention span perspectives and not horror, but yeah, also got some representation. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised since we're doing a data focused session, but yeah, a little bit more sci-fi than I was expecting, but I welcome it. Wonderful. All right, thank you. Thank you for humoring me. This is great. We just have another question for you specific to this session, and then that will be the last of our icebreaker, and I'll hand things over to Jamie from there. But just to sort of understand where you're coming from, we wanted to ask whether you're considering using the transportation equity dashboard in your own projects or if you've had the chance to use it already. So our options are, yeah, if you've had the chance to test it out already, great. I see at least somebody has. Another strong camp saying that you haven't used it yet, but that you definitely are planning to. But yeah, excellent. Also that we have lots of folks who are maybe totally new to the dashboard and are, yeah, joining us hopefully for the opportunity to learn a bit more about it and its potential uses. That's great. All right. Then, without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah, thank you all very much for humoring us with our icebreakers today. It was great to get to know a little bit more about you all. Yeah, then I think without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Sophie. That was a fun way to start this workshop. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. My name's Jamie Fisher. I'm joining from unceded Snuneymuxw territory in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. I'm excited to share the Mobilizing Justice dashboard with you today. Just going to start my screen share. There we go. Everything look good?
Yep, we can see your slides.
Great. So yeah, as Sophie said, I'm going to be introducing the Mobilizing Justice Hub and Transportation Equity Dashboard today. I work as the Knowledge Mobilization Lead with this initiative. I won't spend too much time talking about what it is because Sophie did such a great job introducing us. A lot of the work that I've been doing in the last year has been around supporting the uptake of this tool, which takes a really massive database created by Statistics Canada and harnesses it into an online map tool with tons of visualization features and different components that'll help you get information about transportation equity in your communities. So my overview today will be to just give you some background really quickly on the why of transportation equity and why we want to create measures of transportation equity. I'll talk specifically about the spatial access measures, focusing a little bit more on the active transportation, the walking and the cycling measures today, because I get a lot of questions about how those measures account for walking and cycling conditions, which is a quite unique feature of the spatial access measures data themselves. Then I'll give you an overview of the transportation equity dashboard and show you the hub, and then I'll give you a live demo of the dashboard, and then we can have a question and answer period. So transportation equity at the very highest level, it seeks fairness in transportation systems and how we're able to move around and meet our daily needs. It is primarily about people, always about people, and recognizing that the burdens that folks experience are related to mainstream systems of power that largely overlook the needs of non-dominant communities. And so in this context, we're always thinking about people as being involved. And a huge part of both the process and the outcomes, people are who are impacted by transportation outcomes. And it is, who is involved and who is not involved in the processes of designing transportation systems that impacts those outcomes. Measuring transportation equity is a key area of interest for planners and practitioners. So there's many places we can begin operationalizing equity in transportation work, measuring the impacts, baseline conditions, et cetera, of transportation equity is a really foundational starting place, and lots of questions around how to do that. The concept of complete communities, most people here have probably heard about. It's highly related to transportation and land use both. And this is a concept that speaks to the ability of being able to reach most daily needs in short walking or cycling distances. And then, more destination type places by transit and other sustainable modes. It recognizes there's an interrelationship between where housing is located and where destination services and amenities are located, and the types of transportation options that are available to reach those things. And in order to enable complete communities, there's a need for land use changes and a need for infrastructure to particularly support walking and cycling safety, and as well to bolster public transit opportunities. So the government of Canada and provincial and local governments are collectively investing billions in sustainable infrastructure to enable complete and connected communities. And there's a need for a measurement framework or several to identify areas with inadequate transportation connectivity and to monitor the impact of transportation infrastructure improvements and changes in land use over time. So how do investments to support complete communities change the overall accessibility of our communities? There's also a high priority on increasing equity and social inclusion through the creation of complete communities. Currently, there's 1 million low-income Canadians without adequate transportation to work. There's a need to pinpoint where disparities in transportation access is different for different populations. And there's a need to fairly allocate the resources that are being invested. So maps and data are a real useful tool for pinpointing where specifically there is need. These are maps of different types of urban data that other researchers and collaboratives have created, but what they all have in common is that, including with the dashboard, is that they provide an opportunity, a means to pinpoint where different phenomena are co-locating or occurring in the same place. So you may have low income located in a place with low tree canopy cover, for example. So these tools allow you to really drill down and pinpoint where and for whom spatial inequities may be occurring. These maps And indicators tend to be key inputs in broader decision-making processes and narratives around what is happening in communities. Maps are really powerful tools for telling a story about what's going on. And they're very powerful in that spatial data, we can link it across different dimensions. So we can have, environmental and health data linked with social equity data to show different patterns and relationships related to the built environment and where people are living. So that brings me to the spatial access measures. These are a type of spatial data created by Statistics Canada, and they broadly capture the ease of reaching different types of destinations using the transportation network. Before I start, I'll just give a note on the language of accessibility. The way that I'm using it in this presentation and when I'm referring to the spatial access measures is very specific to transportation, geography, and measuring what the amount of destinations that are reachable using the transportation network, but it's very contextual. So I'll say like spatial access to daily needs, accessibility to employment, but there are very, ableist assumptions embedded in these measures in that we're not talking specifically about can a person with mobility impairment get onto a bus or make it to the bus stop, that level of granularity. So it really specifically refers to reaching a destination along the transportation network, and it stops there. So the spatial access measures are a national data set representing the ease of reaching specific destinations by walking, biking, or taking public transit. And there are measures of walking, biking, or transiting to grocery stores, employment, healthcare facilities, educational facilities, sport and rec facilities, and cultural and arts facilities for all the dissemination areas in Canada. These are network-based measures of how many destinations can be reached by walking or cycling for 30 minutes or taking transit for 90 minutes. And they reflect how much is available from home. So a dissemination area is a location, it's a statistical unit representing about 400 to 700 people on average. And that's what we call home area in the spatial access measures. So the scores reflect from that home location how much can be reached by walking, cycling, or taking transit. These measures are different than other proximity type measures that have been released by StatsCan and others in that they're based on travel time and the number of destinations that can be reached from home. And travel time is specifically related to how easy or not it is to move along the transportation network. Areas with more destination in less time have the highest scores. So the darkest purple, you're seeing a map of Vancouver here. And I'll show you some more of these in the live demo as well. But broadly on this map, you can see that in the downtown peninsula and core of Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, that's the area where more destinations can be reached by walking. And that walkability and the density of facilities, it lessens as you go into the suburban areas. So I said that the scores are based on the amount of facilities that can be reached in walking for 30 minutes or biking for 30 minutes or taking transit. So specifically to the walk and bike measures, they used the routing engine Valhalla to model more realistic walking and cycling conditions. And so these walk sheds represent routes that, or they optimize for routes that have sidewalks, lower levels of hills and steps and other types of impedances. But this image in front of you is really just to illustrate what a walk shed or a bike shed is. They're called isochrones in the spatial access measures in some of our documentation. And it's a blob really of how far you can travel along the transportation network in any direction, walking or cycling. And then again, in these measures, more destinations inside that walk shed equal a higher score in the spatial access measures. So the specifics that Valhalla pertains to in creating these optimized walk sheds, like it really optimizes for low stress routes to the best of its ability. So these are based on OpenStreetMap networks and tags, and routing engine is able to kind of tune the walk sheds based on what mode you're using. So for walking, these measures specifically assume the person is walking 3.6 kilometers an hour. The routing engine will favor routes with sidewalks, will avoid routes with stairs and alleys, private driveways and hills. And so all of those considerations either shrink or expand the walk shed. Impedances shrink it. And then for cycling, they're assuming a person is riding a hybrid bike with slick city tires going at 18 kilometers an hour. The routing engine will favor routes with cycling infrastructure, will lower the score based on the number of traffic lanes, higher speed limits, and the presence of hills. And so in previous measures, you'd get basically just a straight line distance from the home location to 400 or 1200 meters. And that is the buffer area that these types of destinations would be counted inside. And this is very different in that you're getting a more realistic blob, walk shed, bike shed, based on the tuning parameters in this algorithm. So this is an example to illustrate it. This is where I used to live in Vancouver, the O, over on the right side of my screen. And I was routing in Valhalla. They have an online tool you can play with to my workplace over by Vancouver General Hospital. And when I just left all the default parameters for cycling, the model was assuming I'm a strong and fearless cyclist, will ride wherever I feel like, and it ended up choosing the shortest possible route by time and distance. And so that's what the model was considering optimal. I would have been routed along a very busy street with no cycling infrastructure. And when I tuned the algorithm to more conservative means, so saying I'm not really willing to use roads with high levels of traffic or no cycling infrastructure, and I do not want to go on hills, I'm routed along low stress bikeways. So it found the local street bikeways as well as protected cycling infrastructure that was mapped to OSM and chose a different route, which is slightly longer. So the first route was 6.6 kilometers, 22 minutes. The second route is 6.8 kilometers, 28 minutes, a little bit longer, but it's optimal because it's a lower stress route that had more high comfort infrastructure, or as much as possible. Likewise for hills, so you can tune the algorithm to avoid hills. This is another place I lived in Vancouver. Burnaby Mountain, Simon Fraser University is located where the one is, and I live down kind of around this area. And tuning my isochrone, just using the default costing. So sure, I'll use busy roads. Sure, I'll use hills if necessary. The isochrone is 104.6 square kilometers, and it includes a 300-meter climb up Burnaby Mountain. I was riding a lot when I lived there, but I don't think I could have made it to work from where I lived up that huge hill in 30 minutes. So it wasn't very realistic. And when I tuned the model to exclude big hills, the isochrone shrinks quite a bit, 104.6 kilometers square down to 78.1, so it's smaller. And it excludes Burnaby Mountain and other quite hilly areas. And so this is the approach that was applied across the cycling and walking measures specifically. That really makes those spatial access measures a bit different. So moving to what the transportation equity dashboard is, I mentioned these are national level scores for just all of dissemination areas in Canada. There's thousands of them, and so it's quite a wily database. There's I can't remember how many. There's over 100 attributes because there's 3 different modes and 7 different destinations. So really, the transportation equity dashboard was intended to take this massive data set and bring it to life. It has 3 components. The spatial access measures themselves, and census data from Statistics Canada Census of the Population 2021, and then charts and interactive features that allow you to understand more about the relationship between the spatial access set measure score and the populations that live in those areas where the scores are being explored. So our timeline, there was a lot of activity to develop and create this tool in 2023. And I joined Mobilizing Justice in, I believe, July of 2023. And it was just before the sneak preview was shared at our annual symposium, which is again coming up in October, just to plug that. So we officially launched it in 2023. And since that time, I've been on sort of a cross-country tour, presenting the database and sharing it with people who may want to use it in their own projects, as well as providing one-on-one or group consults to folks who want to either use the dashboard or learn more about the techniques that we're using to visualize the data within the dashboard. So lots of engagement around that, and then receiving feedback from folks like yourselves who attend these workshops and share with us what you've noticed about it, or whether you're going to use it in your projects, why or why not, all kinds of stuff. So it's been really interesting, and we're kind of refining as we go based on the feedback that we're getting. So this is an overview. This screenshot is showing you what the Mobilizing Justice Hub looks like. And this came out of a lot of the engagement that I just spoke about. And so we have all these data operationalized into this beautiful web map, but there are many kind of concepts, and there's a lot of information, as I just shared, about the spatial access measures that's important to know about to be able to use the tool. And so one of the big things we heard that there needs to be a support for that. So we created the hub, which is a space that provides explainers, demo videos, which is the screenshot on the right. And eventually we're going to have use cases and examples of analyses and things that have been done on these data. And so it's really a space to go to get the information that you need to use the map tool. It's linked to it in several different places. So one of the key pieces on the dashboard hub are these conceptual explainers that put the data and insights into context and support people using the tool, as I said. So we start at a high level with some transportation equity concepts, as I did in this talk. Talk about the equity lens and why there are certain populations that and subsets of the population that are represented in the equity lens in the tool. A little bit of a deeper dive in plain language on the spatial access measures and what they are. And then for those who are even more interested, there's modeling details, and we provide a glossary of terms and then make a link out to lots of different resources. This is the transportation equity dashboard. So the hub supports the use of this tool here. And there's a whole bunch of information packed into this one little interface. I'll go through it statically first, and I'll show you the live demo. So on the left-hand side of the panel, we have 4 different steps that allow you to choose whether you want to look at these spatial access measures for walking, cycling, public transit at peak or off-peak hours. There's the option to pick of those 7 destinations, what destinations you're interested in exploring. You can adjust the access indices. So they're created for Canada, meaning that they're on a scale of 0 to 1, where 0 is the lowest, 1 is the highest. And in the context of like urban development in our country, there's more development in Toronto, Vancouver, et cetera. So when we're looking at the national level scores, we're seeing those centers have the darkest scores, which is true on the national level, but sometimes we want to look at the scores relative to the region that we're in. So we've rescaled them so that you can look at them either at the CMA level or the CSD level, so the like regional or municipal comparisons. So that's what you can do with step 3, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then you can choose a population group to explore how access varies and relates to the general population. So you could choose how does access to schools for children in 0-14 age category look in your community. There's also a tool that pops up, a chart window that pops up that gives you a profile of the dissemination area. So you can interact with the map interface. You can click on a dissemination area, and then this pop-up shows up. It tells you what the spatial access score is, whether that's above or below the median in the region, and how many people from the population group that you've chosen in step 4 are in that dissemination area and how much of that population that demographic makes up. There's charts as well on the right panel. So one's a bubble chart, and each of those dots represents a dissemination area. And it's a different way of looking at the information that you're getting in the dissemination area profile window. So along the bottom is information about the proportion of the population that demographic of, in this example, 0 to 14 makes up, and what the access score is. And the trend line gives you information about whether there's an overall positive or negative trend in access to schools for that population. And so in this census division of Toronto, it's slightly negative or low. It's in a downward position. So that's saying that access to schools by that population by walking it's not great. The chart below is a density plot that also shows you how that demographic you have selected compares to the general population. And so all of this information is devised to help the reader, the user, understand where a population that they're interested in understanding spatial access for falls in relation to the general population, whether it's higher or lower, and whether, equity-focused interventions are required. This tool on the bottom left, priority neighborhoods, allows you to show areas where both access to the destination you're interested in is very low, and the population of the priority population that you're looking at is high. And that's a way of sort of finding, pinpointing more closely where there may be a need for more equity considerations. And there's a search bar. I like to show this to folks because it's not the most obvious, but it's very handy. There's all of these little info icons, and if you hover over them, they tell you about that tool, that feature. So if you're sitting there going like, I don't remember what Jamie told me in the workshop that I attended, you don't have to. The information is on hand. There's also the ability to print screenshots and to print the charts that are produced in this dashboard. You can draw on the map and you can add data. I would say, though, adding data is a little bit tricky. Yeah, if it's too large of a data set, it doesn't work. So the priority neighborhoods, again, this is a feature of the dashboard. I'd like to explain it a little bit more. It shows where there's a high population of interest, so high number of children and very low SAM score. So in that example, we're looking at children's access to schools. It would be where there's high number of children under the age of 14 and very low spatial access to schools. So that's what that tool does. And we have additional charts that are coming out that will be linking to the dashboard that drill down into that a little bit more. And when you're interacting with the priority neighborhoods on the dashboard, the ones that are not in that high population, low SAM score category, they sort of gray out. They're still there and you can still interact with them, but they gray out. And then the priority areas show up in a pink or purple color. And then on the bubble charts there, you'll see a red box, that indicates that area of the chart on the right where there's the high population and low SAM score. It shows, so any circles which represent DAs that are inside there would be in the priority area pool. So this is the other tool that will be coming out. So within those priority areas, we say, like, if the spatial access score is in the bottom 25% of the scores for that area, we call that low access. And then in that, we're providing this tool that lets you look at the proportion of the population that lives inside those low access areas. So it's just another level of understanding the distribution. So this example that you're looking at on the screen is from Nanaimo, and it's looking at walking to grocery stores by low income status. And so the tool has taken the priority neighborhoods in Nanaimo where access is low, and then it's tabulated how much of the population that's in low income lives in those low access areas and how much of the non-low income population lives there. And so the trend that we can see in Nanaimo is that indeed there's more people, greater than 25% of the people who do not have low income that live in areas of low access, and folks who have lower income actually live in areas where the access to grocery stores by walking is better. And this can be a reflection of several different things, land use patterns in a city, where low income populations are located, et cetera. But it's another way that you can drill down into these measures and understand a bit more of what's going on. So I'll stop screen sharing this one and do a live demo. Take a breath for 1 second while I get my dashboard open. Okay, and that looks good to me. So now I'm going to show you how to get to the hub through, I think this is the most straightforward way that most folks will remember. So you're looking at the Mobilizing Justice website, and on our website, we have an MJ tab, an MJ Hub tab specifically. So if you click on that, it'll take you right to the hub. So you saw the screenshot of this hub, and you can link to the dashboard directly from this hub. But I wanted to show you what's on it first. And I don't know if you all know, but Zoom has a new feature where you can zoom in. So if you're having a hard time seeing anything that's on my screen, you can zoom in a little bit. So we have a couple things on the hub right now. The main thing is the transportation dashboard. So you link out to it from this transportation equity menu, but this is where the explainers and all the contextual details are that we've provided. And so on this landing page, we give you an overview of what the dashboard is, as I just did, a project background, and some key things you'd want to know about the map tool. What are those key features? Who should use it? Which the answer is everybody can use it. It was designed to support a variety of user types. And we also provide these explainers. So these buttons here, you can go straight to the help page and watch the demo video. You can go straight to the dashboard, or you can go to the explainers. And these are what I was mentioning in my talk a little bit earlier. There's some very high level information on different concepts that you need to know for using the dashboard, and some links and further explanation. And then further down, I'm trying not to scroll too fast so it doesn't hurt your eyes, but there's more details on the actual measuring transportation equity using these measures. And so we've got a plain language explanation of what they are, how to interpret them, illustrations to show you different ways to think about what you're seeing on the maps, and some of those finer details that you may have related to what's in the measures, how you might compare them using the adjusted scores, information on the equity lens or the different populations, the profiles, the dissemination area profile window, the charts, the bubble charts. So everything I showed you in that static version is explained on this page here. I'd also show you that there's this wonderful community initiatives map that's also linked here, and this is a catalog of initiatives addressing transport poverty. So I believe the hub will end up being a space where we have interactive type map tools. So that one's on there too, that you can look at that. Now, if I want to go to the dashboard, go straight to the dashboard link, and it opens up the dashboard page. The landing page is on Toronto, and the default settings are over here on the left. So it's transit at peak hours to healthcare facilities. We're looking at the national scores for the population of 0 to 14. So one thing I like to say to folks too, when we're looking at the map, the colors, they don't represent anything about step 4. The step 4, the populations that we're exploring, that information is in the charts and the pop-up. So the map itself is always representing the spatial access measures only. So they don't shift based on the population that you're looking at. As I said, you can hover over any of these icons to see more information about what you're looking at and how to use that. You've got the priority neighborhoods option, and I am going to now zoom to Vancouver and show you how that works and start interacting. So you can type in, it uses the World Geocoding Service. So you can type in a specific address as well as a place, and it'll take you there. You can X that away if you don't want to look at it anymore. So when I type in search, it'll zoom me over to Vancouver. So now we're still looking at the national level scores. And as you can see, transit, there were darker areas in Toronto actually. So we're comparing, if we're looking at the national scores, we're comparing on that scale of 0 to 1, Vancouver and Toronto, which are not really comparable. So we can change the scaling of these measures to look at relative to the census metropolitan area, which is Metro Vancouver, or we can adjust these scores to look just within the census subdivision or the municipality. And so you see that the scores readjust. So really what they just take the highest score and the lowest score and reset them to 0 and 1. So 0 to 1 is always the scale that these measures are on, where 0 is low and 1 is high. And when I start to click in the map, this is when the dissemination area profile will pop up. So this is telling me that relative to other DAs in Vancouver, this dissemination area has the highest score at 1.0 for getting to healthcare facilities by public transit. This is you can see this is the dissemination area up in the right, on the left side of the right panel. The trend line for getting to healthcare facilities by transit during peak hours is negative, downward sloping, and the population that we're looking at, children, their access is a little bit lower than the median access, but in this dissemination area, it's higher. But overall, the demographic median is lower. I'll show you how the scores change when we look at different modes. Here's walking to education facilities, and you see that the charts repopulate as I change the parameters on the map tool. You can actually select dissemination areas as well by clicking in the bubble chart. So if you see one that you want to go, where is that? You can just click on them and the map tool moves around. And again, when I change the population, the scores do not change, but the charts do change. What else do I want to show you on this tool? I think that's the live demo is really like the more pertinent questions that always come up are about if the population changes. So I can stop that demo. If you wanted to go back to the hub too, you can just click the About tab and it takes you smoothly right back to the hub. So that's very nice. And I'll stop sharing that screen and see if I have other slides for you after that live demo. I think I have a couple, and then open the floor for your comments and questions. Oh yeah, so importantly, I said a lot of good things about the measures, and I really like them. I wanted to share a couple examples of how they're being used, and then I'll show you some maps, a couple other maps that show you how, the outcomes, the spatial access measures scores relate to where infrastructure is based on some work I did in the city of Burnaby and Vancouver. So the biggest consideration that I've come to understand and through many, many conversations with different potential users are questions about travel behavior and ability within these measures. So I did talk a lot about the cycling and walking measures. The transit measures, they do account for walking to the bus stop and walking from the bus stop to the destination. But within all of these, again, we're never capturing the quality of the built environment. So the scores will reflect, they'll be higher if there's a sidewalk or a bike lane. but we're not actually getting down to like, are the sidewalks in terrible condition? Like, are there difficult curb cuts, things like that. And so also we're assuming some reference person when we put all those parameters into the model to create the walk and the bike shed. So like there's assumptions about the speed and willingness at different routes and travel behavior. So it's a really good proxy, definitely not perfect, and being the methods being tweaked to better reflect travel behavior. These scores are biased towards larger metro areas. They're also biased by or may be incorrect based on OpenStreetMap tagging or network challenges. And so I have seen in some places, the scores are showing me an unexpected value, like based on the knowledge I have about that place, you'd think, oh, that should be a higher score, and it's not. That could be related to underlying OSM network errors. And so that's something just to be aware of. And also the completeness of the open data destinations. There's a lot of different data sets that are packed into these spatial access measures. They're very comprehensive, but there's also, completeness and representation considerations across all facets of them. Again, I said that in assumptions about ability and travel behavior. This very much a related point about that routing engine. So the big thing related to the cycling measure specifically is that the routing engine may not exclude very uncomfortable roads. Like it does to a degree, but there's no guarantee that all of the very uncomfortable ones have been excluded. So it's potentially still better than proximity, but potentially still misrepresenting where cyclists would ride specifically. But this is a common measurement framework that we can now start working with to understand where spatial access or the potential for spatial access by sustainable modes is higher or lower, and where improvements need to be made. They're providing new insights on the relationship between transportation infrastructure and land use. So really, really show where the land use is separate, like where it's single family residential, those places tend to show up with low access scores because there's no destinations nearby. And I also think that they're interesting in showing like, yeah, the potential of where we might activate more active transportation. Like if they're high, but there's no infrastructure there, that's a great place to focus attention on. And they're complementary, so we can integrate them, and I recommend integrating them with other data sets and in different maps with different map data. And in some of the examples that I've encountered, so the City of Toronto used it in a short-term infrastructure prioritization project. So it was one variable that went into deciding what cycling infrastructure projects were going to go forward in 2024. The United Way, is using it in a neighborhood wellness framework, again, as like one indicator of neighborhood wellness, being able to access things like libraries and schools. So they're using some of the spatial access measures and some custom, some additional measures created by stats, this method with different destinations. It's also we've used it in a national analysis, looking at disparities in access for different populations across all CMAs in Canada. So that's not actually using the dashboard, but the data underneath it and the methods that are being used to visualize the data. And the maps that I'm just going to show you now are from a complete communities analysis in Burnaby, BC. So they were in this situation, a base map we collected a whole bunch of data points for different types of destinations, all kinds, and the spatial access measures were used underneath the data set to show where access was higher. And we had supplementary data to put on top of it. So in Vancouver, overall, this is the city of Vancouver, you can really see that the higher SAM scores do align with where there's more cycling infrastructure. So these are the Canvix cycling measures, another national data set of active transportation cycling infrastructure. And the scores tend to cluster where there's more infrastructure. Again, if we rescale them, the same pattern persists. The scores are relative. So overall, Burnaby over here on the right side of the screen does not have that much cycling infrastructure on the whole. And if we're looking regionally, the spatial access measures are quite a bit lower. If we're looking locally, it does show within like the Burnaby context or the Vancouver context where access is higher or lower, and it still tends to be around infrastructure. Likewise for schools and infrastructure. So this is not a very well labeled map. I apologize. But on the left is spatial access by walking to K to 12 schools. And the dots represent K to 12 schools. So you could see how there's higher scores where more schools are nearby. And even still, you could see on the right-hand side, those are the Canbic cycling measures again, and it shows also that higher scores are related to where there's cycling infrastructure. So the right hand shows cycling to schools with cycling infrastructure, so three data layers. And we could really see how higher scores cluster around where there's both infrastructure and the destinations, cycling infrastructure and the destinations. So that's it. I have talked enough. And now I will turn my attention to the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jamie, for walking us through this. I really appreciated your attention to sort of every step of between sort of finding the dashboard, the great sort of background knowledge resources that the team has developed behind it. And already diving in also to some of the more technical questions, background of the data and some use cases. I'm sure that others in the call join me in excitement for knowing more about this tool. Also, just sort of selfishly as a cyclist, I'm happy to learn about the availability of the sort of like ease of routes that this I've also learned about through this. We did have a couple of questions from the audience in the chat already. I will start by relaying those. And I would say that others who are joining us today, if you have other questions that come up along the way, please do feel free to continue putting them in the chat or even raising your hand, and we'll sort of address those after this first set as time allows. So the first question that came up, some of the participants were sort of wondering about specifically for sort of the cycling speed threshold, how 18 kilometers an hour was selected. Specifically, there were at least like a sort of there was sort of an understanding that maybe more like 15 kilometers is standard for platforms like Google Maps, but that might sort of be adjusted based on user behavior. Yeah, so we would be curious if you have any more sort of insights as to why a slightly higher speed threshold was selected for the purposes of the dashboard.
That's a great question. I had a similar question myself when I started learning about these measures. So the way that they were developed were in consultation with like these active transportation measures, especially in consultation with active transportation researchers. As far as like what happened in the rooms when they decided 18 kilometers an hour is the speed, I can say that the walking measures went through a lot of deliberation. Those were originally set to 5 kilometers per hour and lowered to 3.6 because 5 kilometers is certainly too fast. And to be honest, I'm not actually sure what the average cycling speed to different destinations is. But these measures assume on a flat ground with like slick tires and nice conditions, the average rider could go 18 kilometers an hour. And then in the context of like impedances, if there's hills, if there's lower levels of infrastructure, higher levels of stress, the cycling speed is reduced in that model I talked about. But as far as why and the 18 was selected as sort of the default, I don't know, but I am the person to tell these questions to because I'm the direct line to the folks who are making the next iteration of these measures. So there were also concerns, as I mentioned, around certain types of routes being included. So on OpenStreetMap, if the routes are tagged as no cyclists are allowed to use this route, like there's a no cycling tag, then they're not included. But they had to sort of select some representation of what exceeded like a threshold of comfort that not everybody agrees with. And so these measures are being refined all the time. So I've 15 kilometers with some exclamation marks in my notebook here to share back to the folks. Yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. Though I don't actually know why the 18 was selected in the moment it was.
Yeah, thanks so much for your reflections on that. And yeah, also a very, it's a good reminder that part of the benefit of this kind of workshop format is that yeah, participants really sort of can directly influence in this way what goes
Yeah.
into future improvements. So that's wonderful. I think your at least sort of hypothesis about that being related to the stress level of particular routes would make sense to me as a sort of starting point. But yeah, great that the team is continuously sort of reflecting on yeah, on that methodology as well. So moving to other questions, we also had a question from the audience that was from Kimberly Nelson earlier on. How are populations at risk captured as they are rarely part of census data, don't always carry phones with data enabled, and are not always listed in trip destination?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really excellent point, and particularly the reason I mentioned at the beginning too that these measures definitely have ableist assumptions in them, like assuming a reference cyclist and a reference walker and a reference transit taker does not account for the entire population, if not the 25% of the population or so who's not going to be captured in the census if they've got a disability, or indigenous communities are not captured adequately in the census either. So, the dashboard itself is limited only to Census Canada data from the population. And so that assumption that there are populations missing is inherent. So, this question of how to more accurately represent communities who may have different barriers has come up quite a bit. And in my work, I try to take an approach that triangulates different data sources. It's very difficult, even in this complete communities analysis I was talking about in Burnaby. Accessibility from a disability perspective was an important consideration, though the data are really, really limited in what we were able to bring in. But in that context, I don't think we will see these populations who are not represented in the census represented on the dashboard. But I always would recommend to bring different data sources in and cross-reference.
Yeah, I actually think that leads really well into the next question. You reflected a bit about the dashboard's capacity to be able to integrate new data sources. Yeah, mentioning also that this can potentially be tricky with relatively large amounts of data, but yeah, specifically one of our participants, Sahil, had asked, is it possible to use one's own geographic areas? For example, in public transit modeling in Ontario, we commonly use traffic analysis zones for data analysis and mapping.
That's a super question, and the answer is yes. With some data wrangling, the dashboard shows the spatial access measures at the dissemination area level, and we actually aggregated those up from dissemination blocks, which are very small, like a block in a city, because those are the dissemination areas are the smallest unit to which you can link census data. So we couldn't use dissemination blocks, but so yes, you can take the dissemination block data though and aggregate it to different areas. So you would have to do a little bit of data wrangling. We won't probably be doing that on the dashboard, but we have documentation and supports to walk a person through how they might go about doing that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thanks so much for that explanation. It's great to hear how relatively flexible the dashboard can be in that respect. Yeah, I guess I would just something that has also come up in the chat about this topic. Just the topic we were just talking about in terms of yeah, like how we define the sort of speed thresholds and what the sort of behavior patterns for a typical user is. I'm curious whether this data is sort of like annual average. So of course we live in most of us live in climates here in Canada where there's high variability depending on seasons. And I'm curious whether that's whether that's something that the team has talked about, whether there's yeah
Like the climate considerations that's come up. Yeah, so the spatial access measures are 100% like a snapshot in time, and they're not going to represent like winter conditions, um, or maintenance, things like that. And again, like they are that snapshot in time too. So these measures were created in 2023, I believe. So they're using OSM data from that period, or perhaps just like end of 2022. And so, you know, that the measures would probably look a little bit different if created today. But the plan, I believe, from the StatCan side, there's been a very high level of interest in these measures. I don't even know that their intention was for them to be as interesting as they are, but it's speaking to this need to measure that relationship between land use and transportation. So they're planning to make at least one more iteration, probably next year. So we would then have 2022 measures to compare to 2025. But yeah, to your first point, Sophie, the no winter maintenance, and you know, seasonally, we're just assuming it's like a perfectly fine day to go out for a walk, bike, or take the bus, without coming up against any major challenges related to the weather.
Great that there's sort of potential interest in looking more into the sort of infrastructure conditions that also might be able to sort of anticipate some of those questions. Thanks so much for your reflections on that.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I actually maybe that leads into another question I would have. If others in the audience have other questions that are coming into your minds, we have definitely at least another sort of 5-6 minutes for audience Q&A if you want to raise any of those in the chat or by raising your hand. But you talked about the sort of horizon of sort of develop the timeline for sort of developing the dashboard in this sort of shorter term, at least horizon for new features that are going to be released. I was wondering about the sort of like longer term horizon of like operating the dashboard. Is it something, I'm curious what the sort of prospect is for the dashboard's maintenance and sort of
Hmm. Yeah.
accessibility in these years times. And if that is something that's like, don't ask me about that, Sophie. We don't know if it's a stress
No,
topic.
that's a good question. I think Jasmine's here too. We were just having a team meeting where this topic came up yesterday. Like we have a lot of different types of products that we're creating through Mobilizing Justice. And so some of them are interactive and map-based, like the hub and the dashboard, and some are going to be more like a downloadable resource. And so I think we will be upkeeping the hub for sure. And probably you will see these more interactive type tools showing up there. And we'll be linking it, you know, keeping it tied to the Mobilizing Justice website. Folks are quite familiar with that space, we determined yesterday. And so we will be maintaining the map, we'll be maintaining the hub, we'll be updating it as updated data become available. And maybe I'm not sure, but maybe there's, you know, the option to keep historic data up there too. So to support that long-term monitoring over time. Though we probably won't be building out like Mobilizing Justice web content besides the interactive features on the hub and the dashboard, but expect they're not going to be obsolete. And Jasmine said, and we will circulate this in our newsletter. So please subscribe. And we are also having our annual symposium coming up in October here. So we'll be discussing, Steve will be talking about the things that we've done at MJ over the last year. There will be some exciting discussion about a national survey, National Transportation Equity Survey that's being launched, student presentations, discussions from community partners who are working on different projects. There's pilot project presentations. There's tons of different presenters. So we'd love it if you could join us for that as well. Jasmine just put the date and the registration in the chat.
That's wonderful. Thank you also, Jasmine, for sharing these links to these great resources and for flagging the opportunity for our participants to sort of get in on the action through the symposium. I will also say the former environmental history major in me had a bit of a sparkly heart moment when you mentioned the possibility of being able to integrate this historic data as well for
Oh yeah,
comparability. That's I was really happy to hear that.
that'll be cool.
Yeah,
Fun.
yeah, absolutely. Great. Always thinking of new uses. Okay, I don't think that I've spotted any more questions from the chat. But yeah, maybe as you'll also be able to see, Jamie, lots of praise and expressions of gratitude for the great work behind this and for this really clear and engaging presentation and walkthrough. And yeah, I wanted to echo those feelings as well.
Thank you. I just
Yeah.
put my email in the chat if anybody wanted to discuss the dashboard further. There's usually one or two people who reach out after they see this. So you're welcome to reach me at the email I provided.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for your openness as well, Jamie. If that's the case, yeah, speaking of sort of feedback about the dashboard and this kind of work, I will just roll in maybe to our sort of closing mentee questions. If you just give me 2 seconds to share my screen. Maybe if somebody has the mentee link handy for those of you who weren't joining earlier. You can also go to menti.com and use the code 1208, not 878, in order to join. Thank you, Jasmine, for the link.
Ever wonderful facilitators, both of you.
Good presentations make it easy. So I wanted to start with a question that is a follow-up to a question that we asked in the first Menti polls. So after hearing from Jamie about the dashboard and how it works, we're curious whether you're considering using the transportation equity dashboard in your own projects if you haven't already. So options being, I have used it already. You're asking redundant questions. I haven't used it yet, but I definitely will. We also, want to leave it open to, for example, one person says, still experiencing some kind of barrier to utilizing it, but seeing, what it could definitely hold in terms of potential. But yeah, great to also see the enthusiasm for being able to pick it up already. Leave a few more moments for folks to be able to share, to be able to join and tap in. So just as a reminder, you can find the Menti link in the chat, or you can enter menti.com and use the code 12089878, which is also at the top of the screen. So I will move on to our next question, which is just asking a bit or providing an opportunity to, share any thoughts about why you are, or in the cases, for example, of folks who were saying that they still felt there were barriers to utilizing the platform. Why you are or are not considering using the dashboard in your own projects. Yeah, so seeing a comment about different population group selections. I don't know whether that is a comment about potential barriers, like whether there are other population groups of interest, for example, or if that's a potential. I imagine that it reflects both. And more positive comments. School-specific data, definitely a gap, which is great. It says potential to fill it. The potential to sort of look at key demographics. In equity data in transit project business cases, absolutely, to be able to sort of visualize that. Ooh, lots of great feedback. I won't go into all of it, but I will, yeah, will be able to share the responses with the team that's continuously working to develop this.
Those are
Yeah,
great.
wonderful. Yeah, I'll leave this open for a few more moments, just recognizing that it takes a bit more time than just selecting a multiple choice option. Yeah, lots of great feedback about the school option in particular. Um, yeah, great. Like strategic plans definitely are increasingly recognizing equity as central. So absolutely, this should fit into development of for planning. All right. Thank you so much for your responses.
Yeah.
We also have a few questions that we ask at the end of all of the Mobilizing Justice webinars in order to sort of, yeah, improve future sessions and the programming. So the first question being, did this workshop deepen your understanding of transport equity and justice? Yeah, for these questions, I'll just leave sufficient amount of time for folks to be able to share their thoughts. All right, thanks for sharing. And then it's a bit redundant with the question specific to the dashboard, but yeah, just as another way of phrasing it and for consistency of our data, did you find the information useful or applicable to your work? All right, glad to that we were able to help. Okay. And then does this workshop format or did this workshop format give you the opportunity to share and learn? All right, great to see that. And then this is just an open response. If there are any other thoughts, suggestions, or concern you would like us to know about this session, you can of course also always contact us after the session is over if you have feedback that you would rather not have for the group to see, or if you want more time to mull that over. All right, well, great. That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for your feedback and really active engagement and great questions. We really, the last thing that is on my plate is to let you know that there will be one more community of practice session this year. It will be taking place in November, but we need to fix the date for that. But rest assured, we will definitely keep you up to date about further details. And yeah, in general, keeping up with the initiative. I would say that the newsletter that Jasmine shares the link to already would be a great resource for that. But yeah, just keep your eyes open for the November session. Great. Without without anything else on my side, David, anything on your side, or Jamie, any last remarks or anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up a hair early?
I just want to say thank you to everybody who came. Yeah, it was a really great turnout, and hopefully the tool is going to be helpful for folks.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much, Jamie, for your time and for your great walkthrough and all of the work that you and the team are doing to put this really useful tool together. Wonderful. I'm just going to stop the recording then.
Thank you, Jamie.